My first semester at Divinity School, I was taking a class on early Christian history. It was a survey course where we went through like 1,500 years of Christianity. And with all of the incredible developments and heroic acts to keep Christianity going, it was also interesting as a Latter-day Saint to see elements of the apostasy at work and see when this doctrine seemed to dissolve and when this practice came on that hadn't existed before and when this council convened and this creed was written and so on. Honestly, as I watched all of that history unfold and then thought about the history of our little church these last 200 years, so often at the end of class, I would walk out and then walk across campus humming to myself one of two hymns, either "We thank thee, O God, for a prophet," or "Praise to the man." I came away from studying Christian history with a deeper testimony of LDS history than I'd ever had before. So grateful for the contribution that the prophet Joseph Smith made to the history of the Christian church. It's with that in mind that I love section 135, verse 3. Praise to the man is W.W. Phelps's way of honoring Joseph Smith. It was his musical eulogy, so to speak. And to think of all that W.W. Phelps felt for Joseph, when Phelps had left the church and caused some major problems, but then came to himself and the penitent prodigal came back, and Joseph accepted him with open arms. "Come, dear brother, now the war is past, and for those who were friends at first shall be friends again at last." Well, Phelps's best friend had just been killed. And there was this mixture of anger and sorrow and faith and hope and devastation and anticipation, all rolled into one in that magnificent hymn, "Praise to the Man." Well, if that's Phelps's version, John Taylor's version is section 135. It doesn't rhyme. We haven't set it to music, but it's worth singing, especially if you look at verse 3. Joseph Smith, the prophet and seer of the Lord, has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this world than any other man that ever lived in it. And then he gets more specific. In the short space of 20 years, and it's incredible how much Joseph did in that short time. In fact, in some ways, the church started in 1830, and it's now 1844. That's only 14 years. We need to rewind the clock a bit so that we can bring forth the Book of Mormon and then translate it. And that's what he's going to talk about. Again, couch the mission of Joseph in scriptural terms, which he does. In 20 years, short space, he has brought forth the Book of Mormon, which he translated by the gift and power of God, and has been the means of publishing it on 2 continents. He has sent the fullness of the everlasting gospel, which it contained, to the 4 quarters of the earth, has brought forth the revelations and commandments which compose this book of Doctrine and Covenants, and many other wise documents and instructions for the benefit of the children of men. So far, so much of that has been restored scripture that he's giving us. Beyond that, though, he has gathered many thousands of the Latter-day Saints, founded a great city, and left a fame and name that cannot be slain. He lived great and he died great in the eyes of God and his people, and like most of the Lord's anointed in ancient times, has sealed his mission and his works with his own blood. And so has his brother Hiram. In life, they were not divided, and in death, they were not separated. And honestly, with a legacy like that for Joseph Smith, I hope I can say the same about me. In life, I do not want to be divided from the prophet Joseph. And in death, I hope I am not separated from him, because I know where he is, and it's where I want to be, because that's where Jesus is. To think about all that Joseph did to help us come to know Christ. That's why I love that phrase. He's done more, save Jesus only. Essential caveat. Thank you, John, for keeping things in perspective And to think about all that Joseph did to bring forth Scripture, well, guess what? Jesus is the one who inspired it all. To think of Joseph gathering saints, but who made them saintly? It was Jesus. And what were they gathering to? Not to Joseph, it was gathering to Christ. Sometimes skeptics have said, what drew people to Joseph? Why would anybody join the LDS church? Well, it must have been Joseph's charisma. And I'll admit, he had charisma. And yet, the vast majority of the first generation of Latter-day Saints joined the church before they ever met the man. So this was not a conversion to charisma. It was a conversion to Christ, typically through the Book of Mormon and the witness of the Spirit, that Christ was at work again with his marvelous work and wonder, and that because of his love for humanity and his desire to extend the blessings of salvation to every child of God that has ever lived, what did Jesus do? He called upon Joseph and revealed truth to him and gave him Scripture, inspired him, encouraged him, and led him through a whirlwind of 20 years worth of work. Well, 200 years worth of work, but squeezed into 20 years. We're still working on that work ourselves, trying to build on what Joseph started. What a foundation he has laid for us all. But the foundation itself of prophets and apostles, as Paul said, still has Jesus Christ as the chief cornerstone. I hope that any non-Latter-day Saint who comes to worship with us in church, if they ever hear us as a congregation singing praise to the man, I hope they see through that testimony of Joseph to our greater testimony of Jesus. And that the only reason we are praising that man, lowercase m, is because he was pointing us to the man of holiness himself, capital M, capital H. You understand what I'm hoping to convey here? I love the prophet. But more than Joseph Smith, I love the Lord. And in some ways, why I love Joseph is because he has taught me about Jesus in ways that no one else ever has. And I will always be grateful to him for that. There's a fascinating verse in John where these saints from these Greek-speaking converts have come to Jerusalem to participate in one of the feasts. And they sought out Philip. They specifically wanted to talk to that particular apostle. And Philip is a Greek name, and so perhaps these Greek speakers, that was their guy. If the German saints came to conference, I'm sure they'd want to hang out with Elder Uchtdorf. Okay? If the French-speaking saints came, I'm sure they'd want to hang out with Elder Cosset. I love this calling. Okay, I loved him as Bishop Cosset, but as Elder Cosset, amazing, right? But to think about those who came to seek Philip, don't put a period there. It says they came and they desired him, but that's not where the period goes. It's just a comma. It says they desired him, comma, saying we would see Jesus. They only wanted Philip because they knew Philip could take them to Christ. That's why I love Joseph Smith. I only desire him as a means to a far more celestial end, and that end is Christ. That being said, I hope that we can honor the role that the prophet played. His name is had for good and evil among all nations, and even among those of us who belong to the church that he helped restore. There are those that can't find themselves able to sing praise to the man with the same amount of vigor they did in childhood. And I hope we can change that. I hope we can come to know Joseph well enough to be able to sing that song with all we've got. In fact, far from the quiet humming across campus at Vanderbilt, just a couple years ago, I was sitting in Carthage Jail, surrounded by close friends, fellow faculty members at BYU. We had just spent a week covering practically every place in church history that we could, following in the footsteps of Joseph Smith from all over the eastern United States. But there we were in Carthage, and thankfully we were the earliest group that the missionaries let in. And there was not a group right behind us waiting to come into the room. We had some time, and a bunch of religion professors, oh yeah, we're going to take advantage of it. And the sweet senior missionaries shared their message, and at the end, before we left the room, we just asked them, would it be okay if we sang Praise to the Man together? And they honored that request. And to be surrounded by a group of friends, fellow servants, who have spent their lives studying and teaching all that Joseph Smith has given us, that was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had singing that song. Thank you, brethren, for allowing me to join you in that. But by the end, we were all on our feet, standing ovation, grateful for all the prophet had done for us. And in that same spirit, one of my colleagues who had written the biography of Henry B. Eyring said that at one point President Eyring had shared that if Joseph Smith were to walk into a room filled with ancient and modern prophets, when Joseph Smith walked in, they would all stand too. So, brothers and sisters, praise to the man who communed with Jehovah. We can express our gratitude for Joseph for that. And we can praise Jehovah for having been willing to speak to that man.